Hello, everyone. The professional resource that I will be sharing is Helping Children Succeed: What Works and Why by Paul Tough. The reason why I picked this book is because um, the achievement gap is something that in this country is something that I'm really interested in, just figuring out why it's there, what can be done about it, and just different aspects of it that we can affect as educators, because I'm aware that not all of it is something that can be solved with education or with, within the schooling system. Like, there's more to it than just that. And so that's why I chose this book. I was just interested in that. And something that I found really good was because this book wasn't necessarily about the different practices that I can add to my teaching, or, like, do this and do that in the classroom. It was more about things that you can do that are subtle, such as like building character in students, and character that transfers in both their academic life and their lives outside of school as well. And so that was really interesting to me because I feel like sometimes I'm not even a teacher yet, but I feel like sometimes as educators, we can address like issues that are purely in the classroom, and try to come up with all these different strategies to, like, how can we improve this? How can we do this and change scores and all of that stuff, when really the root issue is something that is outside of the school environment. It's outside of academia. And that was what was really interesting to me and eye-opening. He discussed mostly about like upbringing and the child's environment at home, and specifically talking about low socioeconomic homes, and how different stressors are present in lower socioeconomic homes that affect a child's academic life. And so this wasn't really about school, more so it was more so about home life and upbringing, and just cognitive health, different things like that. So let me go ahead and start before I finish my presentation. Next. Uh-oh. How do I go to the next slide? There we go. Okay, so he first starts out by addressing socioeconomics in the American public schooling system. And these are some of the statistics that I found interesting. 51% of public school students now fall below the federal government's threshold for being low income. This number has been on a rise since 1989. Very interesting. According to the U.S. Department of Education, the gap in 8th grade reading and math test scores between low-income students and their wealthier peers hasn't shrunk at all over the past 20 years. The difference between SAT scores of wealthy and poor high school seniors has increased over the past 30 years, from a 90-point gap on the 800-point scale in the 1980s to a 125-point gap today. The educational disparity between the poor and the affluent is also seen in college attainment rates. And so this is such a big issue that I feel like everyone could find one point that they think is important to it, and everyone would be right, because there's just so many different things that are playing a part in the achievement gap, and just low socioeconomic homes having children that struggle in school just because of so many different things that have to do with that don't have to do with school, rather. Okay, so next, the environment. So the environment was a huge focus in the book. He said a child's environment has the potential to affect their cognitive health and abilities. This is a specific quote. Adversity, especially in early childhood, has a powerful effect on the development of intricate stress response network within each of us that links together the brain, the immune system, the endocrine system, and the glands that produce and release stress hormones, including cortisol. And so a child's environment plays a huge part in their development. in their cognitive development, in their emotional development, all of those different things. On a cognitive level, growing up in a chaotic and unstable environment and experiencing the chronic elevated stress that such an environment produces disrupts the development of a set of skills controlled by the prefrontal cortex known as the executive functions. And what are the executive functions? They are self-regulation, cognitive flexibility, developmental building blocks, the neurological infrastructure underpinning non-cognitive abilities like resilience and perseverance. And so these are all things that environmental stress cause in students, and not just young students, but he talked about how younger kids are more sensitive to these stressors because this is something we all have in our lives that affect all of us. And so it's just that children are more sensitive to the effects of this, and while their brains are in that developmental stage, these things are kind of having them be set back, like environmental stressors. And so, you may be wondering what this has to do, like if we all go through it, what does this have to do with the achievement gap? Well, it's not hard to imagine that in poorer homes that there's most likely more stressors present in the home. Busy parents, no money, different things like that, and negligence is a part of a stressor, because as you grow up, you need that support, and you need the presence of relationships. Maybe jumping the gun here. I think that might be my next slide. Define environment. So the environmental factors that matter most have less to do with the buildings they live in than with the relationships they experience, the way the adults in their lives interact with them, especially in times of stress. And so he's saying that your environment isn't even, you grew up in this home or in this neighborhood, but more so the relationships you had in this home and in this neighborhood. And so I believe, what is next? Yeah. How can educators help? So as educators, we have already so much on our plate, like, meeting standards and different things like that. But what can really help would be in addition to everything else we do, what can really help would be the relationships that we have with our students. If environmental stressors are defined as relationships, then I feel like as educators, we play a part in having good relationships with students, whatever environment they grow up in. It could be, right now I'm specifically talking about low socioeconomic families, but whatever family a child comes from, these stressors are present because of different relationships that they have. And so, yeah, as educators, we have that role, we have that opportunity to be a positive relationship. And so I just found this book really, I think this is my last slide, but I just found it really interesting because there are things that we can do beyond reading strategies to improve reading. Here I have creating a sense of belonging, self-confidence, and purpose. Like having that environment in your classroom can affect reading comprehension, because there's not this constant distraction because you're in this stressful state. He talked about flight or flight. We all know that whenever you're stressed and these hormones are released, and it was saying that children that grow up in stressful environments, that this is constantly a feeling that they have. And obviously, that would distract from learning. And so what type of environment would I want to have in my classroom, And so like I said before, there's so many different causes of the achievement gap, and so many different causes that we can talk about, but just kind of taking it back and saying, okay, what's the one thing I could do? What are the small things that I could do? Because when you look at certain statistics, it seems like you're completely powerless. At least that's how I feel when I look at certain statistics. It's like, okay, so 51% of students are below the what is defined as poverty, basically, and these are at-risk students. What can I do as an educator? there are already these demands that you have as a teacher. So what can you do? And so to me, this book just kind of slowed all of that pressure down, slowed all of those demands down, and just like, there are things that I can do. I can create a positive environment. I can have a good relationship with my students, and not be another source of stress in their life. And so that was really big for me. What do I have written here? Now that we know this, what can we do? I already read that. This is big news for those of us who are trying to figure out how we can help kids develop abilities. And more broadly, it's important news for those of us seeking to shrink class-based achievement gaps and provide broader avenues of opportunity for children growing up in adversity. And so he gave 2 examples that I really enjoyed. One is of a teacher, Elizabeth Spiegel. She teaches in a lower income neighborhood in Brooklyn, and she teaches she works with the chess team rather. And so she turned this chess team that was like just not anything. I don't even know if it had a lot of funding, but she turned that chess team into like a powerhouse, and this chess team started winning and outperforming private schools and, you know, other schools in affluent neighborhoods. And so he noticed that in her teaching, or in her coaching this chess team, she didn't speak about resilience or perseverance or anything like that, but she just focused on what she was teaching them, and had them think about, oh, what ways can they improve their game, and where did they not where did they mess up, but what could they have done better, you know? And so he noticed that there was no explicit talk of building character or being or having perseverance, but that's what these students showed. And, you know, eventually becoming such a powerhouse chess team within Brooklyn, like she built that in them just because of that relationship that she had with them. And another example is Lanita Reed. She was a hairdresser and a mentor, and he gave a specific story of her working with a young girl who was always getting in fights at school. She had a very hard home life, and she was always getting in fights. And just after, you know, several months, the book said that, you know, speaking with Lanita, this young girl, her life began to change. And he was asking, like, what did she say? And again, there was no explicit conversation of do this and do that and change, but it was just from listening to her and always talking with this young girl that eventually, and not, you know, obviously addressing things like, you know, you have the opportunity to make a difference, and speaking positively and speaking life into this young girl and how it affected her. And, you know, she began to show these positive qualities at school. She wasn't getting in fights anymore, and just becoming more of a student that was not causing problems at school. And so he talks about that a lot, about how these like subtleties, like it's not always these explicit conversations that produce these character traits that we may be wanting to see in our students. And so it was like, you know, to talk about to teach the quadratic equation or something like that, you have to explicitly talk about the quadratic equation. But he found that with more character-based things, that you didn't need to have this explicit conversation, these motivational speeches to teach these things, that it was just happening inherently in your interaction with your students, your speaking with them, listening with them, things like that, like very simple things that every educator can do. Like it's not, you know, some breakdown in some lesson plan, like, oh, you know, tell them this every day, always say this. And it's just like, just that regular interaction and being there, being that person that listens, that's available, and just shows care in that way, and how that could affect students. And so, yeah, that's what this book is. It has about 23 chapters, and it just goes into different mindset skills and And